everyone. My name is David. I'm the product marketing lead here at Aztec, and I'm joined by Joe, who is the co-founder of Aztec. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is a great setup we've got here.
We're going to go into one of the biggest questions in Web3 in this segment, which is where are the apps? We've been trying to solve this for many years, adoption, what's going to finally bring us there, what's going to bring the real world on chain. And we're going to go through that with some use cases. And I've got a couple of questions for you on that front. But we're going to start with how Aztec has privacy built in at the infrastructure level, at the protocol level, and what makes this different from other chains that are sometimes bolting on privacy or jumping on the privacy narrative. So could you talk a little bit about Aztec building privacy in at the fundamental level and why that's important?
Sure. I think the best way to answer this is going to the real world, as you said earlier, and thinking about how we get privacy in the real world for financial transactions. And by real world, I mean kind of Web 2. And I think most of Web 2 relies on an intermediary to get privacy. So, you have a bank, you send requests to a bank, you have your passport with a bank, and they let you open an account. And then that account starts with zero balance. You send them some money, and they increment your balance, but the world can't see it. And so they're kind of acting as this intermediary to give you privacy. And, that's enabled most of the kind of real world finance we have today. We also have that beyond like kind of finance. We have it for, the normal tech client server model with databases, and there's an intermediary in the middle that's kind of safeguarding your data. And I say safeguarding in kind of inverted commas because it's all good whilst you're on the happy path and everyone's aligned and happy. But at some point, time and again, either human greed comes along and someone decides to sell that data, usually for advertising or to market products to you, or worst case, that data is exploited. And we've seen this time and again with hacks. And I think when we start to think about privacy in the Web3 space, we see a lot of people jumping on the narrative, and their first kind of like attempt at solving it is to do the exact same as Web 2. They stick an intermediary in between a user and the blockchain, and they use that to get privacy. So Providiums work like this, more kind of permission chains or DLT technologies like the old kind of R3 Corda, and newer chains like Canton work like this, where there's kind of a closed set of nodes, and only those nodes can see the data, and so they get privacy through intermediaries. With Aztec, we've built a very different system. We use cryptography, strong cryptography guarantees to enable privacy, and those primitives mean that you can do a lot more. You can always build these other chains and kind of like, I guess, lower models on top of Aztec, but the starting point is kind of cryptographic privacy, and you can layer in or reduce that guarantee if you want to. So I think that's the main point I wanted to kind of get across around the differences of how we do this. I think, what the world needs is any form of privacy. These can all be used together, but I think starting from a point where you have the strongest form of privacy and cryptographic privacy, the same way that we have on SSL with the internet and HTTPS, is the best place to start. Then it's up to a developer then to conditionally reduce that privacy through smart contracts. Like if they want to leak information to a regulator or to counterparties, they can do that, but it's in their control, not mandated by the chain's design. So that's the main differences, I think, between how we approach privacy and how a lot of kind of bolt-on chains approach privacy.
Great. And it's worth reminding everyone that Aztec launched as a fully decentralized network. So from day one, this isn't making promises for later. We are the network is live as a fully decentralized network where people can start building on top of right now.
It's actually worth kind of like on that point, the only type of privacy you can get on a fully decentralized network is cryptographic privacy. So if you try to at the network level have privacy through intermediaries, well, anyone can be a sequencer in a fully decentralized network. So in effect, like these kind of permission blockchains that have limited validator sets, or Providiums where there's usually one validator who is kind of compressing everything into a proof, they just don't work because you'll be broadcasting your data to all of the validators, which we've been there with public blockchains, and it's not private. So
Exactly.
I think that's a key point. And so our validator set is currently close to 4,000, and I think we need cryptography to get privacy.
Great. So I want to get a little bit more concrete and talk about some of the specific use cases. But first, I think we're so deep in the weeds that sometimes we forget that even simple things on Aztec, like sending a private transaction, are actually big breakthroughs for the industry. And so talk to me a little bit about sending private transactions on Aztec and how we enable that, how we do that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a lot of projects kind of in the Ethereum space that are adding some form of privacy, even in other chains like Solana that are trying to add some privacy, but no one's really got close to kind of Zcash privacy. Like Zcash is kind of like the trailblazer of like what is private. We used to be there with Aztec Connect and older versions of Aztec, but really there's not projects today that kind of have all aspects of a private transaction. So some may have anonymity, but you can't do internal transfers, or the amounts are fixed to have a privacy set. Other projects kind of may, they may allow transfers and kind of have more flexibility on what you can send, but the transaction graph is known to someone or multiple people. And so there's not really at the moment, until Aztec is now live, a way to do kind of private like value transfer where it's actually private. And the great thing about Aztec is the token standard that's been built. Any asset you bridge in can have public transactions or these fully private transactions, and I think that's like, it's kind of understated because that's one tiny contract on Aztec, and it's like moving the industry forward kind of a very long way, and it can be composed with other contracts, but that on its own is now the state of the art of what's possible on Ethereum, and it's taken a while to kind of get that back, but it's really exciting that it's now here because we can pay each other privately now, which is like, it's why we're here, right? Like, so
So breaking news, you can now send private transactions on Ethereum. And that's a really big deal for the industry. And
like, I don't want to do like a disservice to the other projects which are doing like similar things in the space, but it's not complete privacy. And so for me, complete privacy is, you have to have the balances confidential, the sender and recipient have to be hidden, and like you have to do all of those and allow kind of you to effectively have the same level as functionality as a bank account, but you don't have to leak all that data if you don't want to a counterparty. So that's kind of what I mean by complete privacy.
So let's go into a few of the more complex use cases, how we're going to see this play out in the real world, apps we expect to be built on Aztec, and use cases. We like to think of the primitives that we're shipping, the privacy primitives, as identity. You can build with private identity, you can build with private data, and you can also build with private compute. So who you are can be private optionally, what you store or send can be private optionally, and also what you do and what's computed can also be optionally private. So this is really a feature complete privacy L2 that we're shipping. And so let's go into some of those different pillars and some of the use cases with them. Maybe we can start with identity. So why do we need private identity on chain? What is this going to enable? What are some of the use cases that you see being built on top of Aztec?
Yeah, I think if I go back to the bank analogy I had at the start, it's the same, right? Like to kind of the way I can open accounts and interact with the real world is based on me being Joe Andrews, having a passport from a country, and that being kind of valid. When I get to like a Web3 kind of world, like having like 0xA or ABC, whatever, is not really... it's useful for kind of like basic payments, but to reach into the real world and start to replace, like the trust pillars we rely on in the real world, we need a form of identity. And identity doesn't have to be just a passport or a driving license or an ID card. It's kind of multifaceted, and I want to get onto that more in a second. But I think the main point is we haven't been able to tie on public blockchains a identity document to a cryptocurrency address, which means that the reason we haven't been able to do that is because everything's public, and so you wouldn't want to kind of broadcast your passport number
Right.
or your social security number onto a public blockchain. But now you have kind of these identity primitives inside Aztec, and you have the ability to do compute privately and kind of prove things about your identity document within inside an Aztec transaction. You can actually bind your cryptocurrency account to your real world identity, which unlocks a huge amount of use cases. And it's not just kind of passports, it's also like pseudo identities. So things like email accounts, social handles, like the data inside your bank account like is kind of linked to your identity, so like credit scores can be derived from that. So it's not just one kind of like, hey, we need to do kind of like a form of like ID check to use Aztec. That's not what we're saying here. You can do that if your use case wants it. There's great projects like ZK Passport that enable like private proofs of passport, but you don't need to just use one type of identity proof. There's other projects that, you know, it may be sufficient that just having social proof that like I own the X handle Joseph is enough for me to do something, or a proof of email, like I have an email address that belongs to aztecprotocol.com, for example, and that's enough to bind my identity to a cryptocurrency account. So it really depends on what you're doing, but I think the main point I want to hammer home is you weren't able to do that previously because the underlying things you need to bind your account to your identity couldn't be broadcast publicly.
Yep.
With an execution environment like Aztec, we can now do this inside private transaction. I think maybe the final point is the reason it's so powerful is a lot of these identity primitives, they don't use nice cryptography. Like they use kind of like ugly Web 2 cryptography, like RSA signatures or like parsing JSON. Like all of these things are really hard to do in a smart contract. But inside Aztec, because we have, I think you mentioned it earlier, private compute, you can do a lot more inside a transaction. So you can actually start to parse these complex data structures and prove things about real world identities, which you couldn't do previously.
Yep. And you already got to private compute there. We'll get there in a second.
Yep.
One thing to note is that these are all, you can think of them like the new Lego blocks of the Web3 space. And these are all composable. You can use them how you want. You can build with some of them. You can leave some of them out to build brand new types of use cases. So I want to actually there's one specific use case that I want to drill down on identity, which is proving salaries or doing payroll or things like that are things that we should have been able to do and that we've been promising for a long time in this space. So what does it actually look like to do something like proving salary or bring identity on chain for doing payroll and things like that with these new primitives?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like salary is the easier one. It's kind of like, you know, there's multiple things that are needed for private salary. Like the most basic one is people feel uncomfortable about their salary. Like I'm British. It's maybe more of a British thing, but I think generally around the world, like people don't put in their Twitter bio like I earn X, like and I spend Y each month. Like that's not a thing you do, right? And so if people get paid on chain today, they're inadvertently doing that. Like there's maybe some obfuscation based on using a fresh address or paying into a centralized exchange, but it's like you basically have no privacy, and so that's a bit of a social taboo. And then worse than that, you can also see what your competitors' employees are earning, and you can poach them. And so it just doesn't work today. And so just the basic use case of private payments we talked about earlier, private token transfer, can just enable you to actually be paid on chain. So that's quite easy. Like you get that out the box. I think what that unlocks once you start having people getting their monthly paycheck on chain is things around private salaries. Like, you know, what do you do in the real world? You use your salary to get a loan, a mortgage, a credit score. And those things require a little bit more plumbing, but the main initial thing is that you need to have money on chain, and you need to be able to prove from like the history that, you know, you've had regular payments from a certain address, which constitutes a salary. So that's kind of like one way of thinking about it. The other maybe more interesting thing is also then tying the real world on chain. And so, you know, you may only want to get 30% of your salary on chain and have some of it off chain because you have mortgages or you have obligations, you have a credit card, and, you know, we're not going to go overnight to kind of fully on chain. It's going to be gradual. And in that world, you can use proofs of kind of banking in Europe and the UK. There's open banking, and I've talked about this before, where effectively all bank data is signed, and so you can get a kind of API call back from your bank, and it will come with a signature that says, "You're David. Your monthly, your monthly inflows are X. Your monthly outgoings are Y. You spent, I don't know, $1,000 on hot dogs,
Yep.
and like you
Whoops.
shouldn't get a loan." So, but that you can prove these things about your kind of salary that you wouldn't before broadcast on chain.
Yep.
And so you can kind of layer these together in a way where now people are getting paid on chain, they're proving things about their outgoings off chain, and you can actually build a very reliable kind of credit score without revealing all of that information to credit card companies or kind of banks, and it actually has a stronger guarantee because everything's happening through these smart contracts. So
Yep.
yeah, it's really exciting where we're going to end up.
Well, great. That's private identity.
Yeah.
But you touched on. I need to get one more question in here because you touched on something really interesting, which is the topic of selective disclosure
Yeah.
and selectively being able to disclose things. Because on Aztec you can have some things private, some things public. You can prove certain things. So, tell us a little bit about selective disclosure in that type of environment where you may need to reveal some things, but you don't want to reveal all of your activity.
Yeah, I think the best way to think about this is kind of the age old like proof of age, right? It's like when you go into a bar, they don't actually need your date of birth and your actual age. They just need to know you're above 18 or you're above 21, and so it's the simplest kind of version of selective disclosure where you're revealing just enough information for the use case that's required, and for a bar, it's is this person like above the legal age to enter the bar? They don't need the photo, your full name, your address, like your date of birth. And usually in kind of Web 2 worlds, because we don't have selective disclosure, the way that people verify this tiny bit of information they actually need is you send them everything. So you send them a utility bill, that you send them your full passport, 2 copies of it,
The picture holding the ID.
Yeah, all this information they get about you, and it's normally just to verify that you're actually a real person and your name matches. So I think when you have selective disclosure, you can basically, inside an Aztec transaction, you can prove this is a valid document. You can prove that the trust authority, the trust anchor, that this document is valid, but only reveal just what you need to. So passport examples are age, the country you're in, you're not on a sanctions list, but nothing else. So it's the minimum needed to kind of pass the check that the smart contract needs. I think there's other ways of thinking about this, kind of email is a good one. It's like I have an email that belongs to this kind of domain name, but I'm not saying who I am. And for the Epstein files that are ongoing at the moment, it'd be very easy to see which emails are real and fake, especially when you're going through Twitter these days and you're seeing kind of these screenshots of redacted emails. Well, I don't know if that's real or not, but you could use selective disclosure to verify the RSA signature inside an email, prove that was a White House email or not, and not reveal who sent it, which is kind of very, very powerful for things like whistleblowing and other forms of kind of new use cases that Aztec can enable.
Yep. Okay, great. So the next pillar, the next privacy primitive is data. So this is what you have, what you store, and what you're transacting. So everything from private payments to what you're holding. So maybe within this context, talk a little bit about, maybe you could tie this to the original vision of Aztec and bring things on chain and why it's important that we have private data on chain and what you're holding is optionally private.
Yeah, so I think the best way to think about this is, all of the use cases we talked about, other than private payments earlier, were kind of ephemeral, right? That they're proving things about documents at a moment in time, and Aztec is validating that at that moment in time, and giving you kind of a yes or no answer about the disclosure is true. To do kind of more interesting things, the system needs state, and I think what this question is really getting at is how do we record things onto Aztec in a way that's encrypted for me, but I can come back to it later and, have a transaction history or have contracts where multiple users can interact and the state is changing. And so in this area, I think there's a lot of interesting properties that Aztec has. You can have state that's just for one user. So I can have my state where I can write things into the blockchain, which are encrypted just for me. Only someone with my encryption keys can decrypt those and find that state. But that's not very kind of interesting. Like if there's only one person on the blockchain, you can't do much. Like in the real world, we need to interact. And so there's ways to forcefully encrypt things for different users on Aztec. So if you were a kind of regulator or kind of an overseeing authority and we're two banks, we may want to transact, but the transaction can only happen if this third party over here has a copy of the data. And we can now write a smart contract that says Joe, David, and the regulator must see the contents of this transaction. We encrypt data for these people, distribute it via Aztec, and write state to the ledger, which means that at any point in the future, people can come back in via one of those three people and decrypt the private state. And so I think it's very powerful because privacy is not a one-size-fits-all kind of equation, and this is a primitive that lets a developer look at their use case, figure out who needs to see what, and actually write an application that enables that. And you can go all the way to a point where we have public state, like most blockchains have, but we now have this spectrum all the way from it's private, only I can see it, through to everyone can see it, and the kind of execution environment lets you decide for every use case, every smart contract, where you want to be between them, and write stuff into the chain with those properties, which is just we've never had that before, which is crazy.
And maybe to a follow-up question there is around compliance. So privacy often, is a loaded term. There's a lot of different takes on it and history with it in the space. But the way we really think about it is opening up new possibilities. And could you just talk a little bit about compliance in that setting and why that will open up a new wave of opportunities for people?
Yeah, I think compliance can mean a lot of things here. It can mean you're not transacting with sanctioned individuals, but I think in the kind of private state and kind of encrypting information for different people, it's maybe better to think more about kind of supply chains or even in kind of the early example we had of putting loans on chain. A loan has a borrower, a lender, and usually a loan agent who facilitates real world things about the loan. In that world, you have the three-person kind of trilemma. They all need information, and so the audit log of what's happened always needs to be encrypted for the loan agent. So if I trade my loan, the loan agent needs to know that I've sent it to a new person. And so when we talk about compliance, it's usually about a history of what happened and proving that nothing kind of nefarious happened. And so this ability to encrypt information for different people just is a core primitive that enables systems to be built that can only be compliant. So I think it's this shift from reactive compliance where it's hey, we need to monitor everything and see what happened, to now I can codify the rules of compliance in my contract and make sure that if this transaction is mined, then I know it followed the rules and was compliant. So it's a nuanced topic, but I think maybe the best way to think about it is all transactions on Aztec can do this. So it's it's up to you. And you don't need to leak information on games, but you may do on some of these kind of more financial use cases. Yep.
Okay, great. So the third privacy primitive is compute, and this one it's kind of an abstract idea or concept to people, but it's extremely mind-blowing when you can really think about what is possible now. So it's possible to think about, okay, you have private identities on chain, somehow that's enabled. You have private data, what you're sending is private, but to also have this third one where what you're doing, the full call stack privacy, everything that happens can also be totally private, is, I think, extremely mind-blowing that it's possible now. So
Yeah.
can you go into what does this mean, private compute? What does it enable? And how do you think about it?
Yeah, so maybe comparing it to private state. So private state, you're reading things that exist on the blockchain, and you're saying, hey, I want to maybe do something with this. Even within private state, right? Like if I'm sending a balance to you, I'm doing a very small amount of compute. I'm saying decrement from my balance and add to your balance. And
Yep.
like how we actually do that is not quite compute, but you get the idea. What private compute enables is you to pass in any arbitrary data that you want to do computations over. So you could pass in medical records, and you could make a giant loop that kind of like goes through all the medical data and proves that like my heartbeat from the last 30 days is X, so I'm healthy or not. And so you can pass in all this very sensitive data, run a computation over it, and that computation happens in a private context, which is the Aztec transaction. And it doesn't have to be data that's on chain. It's a great thing. It's like data the user feeds in and is by definition sensitive data. And so I think the compute is interesting when you can start to do compute over sensitive data. We have kind of someone on testnet has built like a very simple like neural network, and so you can do like very basic machine learning where you're proving that the inference has occurred correctly on this neural network. So it's really, you can do anything inside one of these transactions as long as you can prove it. Then you get a guarantee from Aztec that this happened correctly. And people are using that to kind of do all sorts of things. I think from a practical perspective, it also means that the mental model of what you can achieve in a transaction is much higher than kind of a standard blockchain. Like we have gas limits on Aztec. They mostly apply to public transactions. For private transactions and the private side of Aztec, if you can prove it, that's the limit. So you can do crazy things like verify passport signatures, you can verify email signatures, you can do neural networks all inside an Aztec transaction, and we're not limited by, hey, some sequencer has to execute this somewhere. The user is just like the limit. And so on your phone, you may be limited by what you can prove there, but for more institutional use cases that are running on servers but still need privacy, you can feed huge amounts of data into these proofs and make massive proofs and proofs of massive computations. So I think it's not just kind of like basic user retail payments. It's like you can build very complicated things inside Aztec with private compute.
Great. Well, you heard it here first. You can do anything. You are unlimited. You can do crazy things.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, it's the first time we've actually been there. So I think the design space it's going to change very, very quickly. Like we could sit here and kind of like hypothesize about the different ways this is going to be used, but like we've never had these ingredients in one place. And I think it's not any one of them that makes kind of Aztec special. It's like the unique way a developer can combine them are going to make these applications which can only exist on Aztec. And I think that's the most exciting thing about the network going live.
Yep. So last question. You are now the CEO of Aztec Labs. Tell us a bit about what Aztec Labs is up to and just your journey going through this full process and now stepping into this role leading Aztec Labs.
Oh, it's been a journey for sure. But I think like looking back, my focus has always been around building products, and whether that's kind of the original like genesis of like building products for institutions, like banking products, like originating debt on chain, through to kind of more retail products like private payments and kind of private DeFi. Like that's kind of been like the angle I've tried to bring to things. We weren't able to do that always because the tools we had weren't sufficient, and so Ethereum didn't have strong privacy, and so we've had to build it, and it's taken many iterations, but now it's here. So kind of the purpose of Aztec Labs is to really go back to that kind of those roots and start building products on top of the network. We will always remain kind of like core contributor to the network. We maintain the client and a lot of the developer tooling, but we want to start branching out into kind of actually using that amazing feature set to show the world what's possible. And so there's a lot of things coming this year. I can't say them now, but watch this space.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joe. Coming up next, we're going to be talking with Kira and with Rob about how to start building on Aztec, how to get started, what you can do as a developer. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again so much, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks.